I'm Martin Smith. If anyone tells you they know what an amplitude of a photon is, they are lying. Nobody really knows. I came up with a theory, an amplitude theory that gives me 2.5 times 10 to the minus 10th times the wavelength equal the amplitude. And remember that amplitude is 1/2 the diameter of a photon. I was talking to a friend of mine, Aaron, and he asked me what I was doing 35 years ago before I had a stroke. Directly after it, I had no speech, no feeling in my arms or legs, and I could not add 2 plus 2 together. But before that, I was working on something different. And I've been getting my mind back slowly but surely, and I figured I'd try to explain it. So far, I've done nothing but fail. And this is attempt number 8 or 9, I don't know, but I'm still working on it. The first thing you need to look at with a photon is the classical form. And this is an electric field versus magnetic field. The reason why we look at this form is because this is where the money is. This is how a photon looks to an electron. An electron is affected by the electric field, it is affected by magnetic field. So what this does, this visual aid right here, is not showing the coulombs versus Tesla. It is showing the energy of the photon. So the energy of each one of the electric field and the energy of the magnetic field is half of the energy of the photon. So half the energy of the electric field amplitude would be at the max point, and you would have an amplitude here for your magnetic field. And this is an amplitude of the fields themselves. It is not an amplitude of a photon, and that is where things get confusing. The other way to look at it is this way. The magnetic field is or equals electric field divided by the speed of light. So we can say that the magnetic field is extremely smaller than the electric field. It is, when I say extremely, I mean it is 300 million times smaller. So we have an electric field with an amplitude of the electric field in coulombs. So this is an amplitude of coulombs, and this magnetic field would be an amplitude of Tesla. Again, not an amplitude of a photon, and it is confused that way. The third one that amplitude of photon is confused with is an antenna amplitude, which is measured by intensity. That's saying that you put a large number of photons within this microsecond right here. It creates a wave on its own. If you have a computer and you look at sound waves, that's what this is. We are piggybacking sound waves on top of antenna waves, which is a form of light in itself. And what happens is we are confusing amplitude with intensity. That happens a lot. This was derived from the search of gravity, and I was trying to explain to my friend Aaron that this particular part of the search for gravity, and it is finding amplitude. Okay, to go any further, we will be going down a huge rabbit hole. And this is a rabbit hole of thought. Looking at photon as a helix was semi-popular in the 1980s. It lost its popularity because the math wasn't all that great, and nobody ever got anywhere with it. Nobody put it together with microwaves and water itself and how those things work. I think I broke that. I'm not really jumping up and down about it because I used a math equation. Math equations have a fictional side to it. Math is a language, and it does have fiction. If you don't believe me on that, you have only to look at the field of statistics or look at the success rate of theoretical physicists. Math is not necessarily the greatest at explaining how things actually are. It gives us good examples of how things might be, and I don't advise taking it any further than that. Okay, jumping down a giant rabbit hole, and looking at photons as a helix. The reason why we do this is we know photons have spin. They can either spin clockwise or counterclockwise according to their direction, and we can split those spins. So we can split them apart and use them individually. We know high energy photons under large magnetic fields split into two parts, not three, and that's a very specific issue because photons have two charges and they interact with entities that have three charge. One of them on the photon side, one of them is a positive charge, one of them is a negative charge. Under high EMF fields, like high magnetic field, one turns into an unstable electron, one turns into an unstable positron. Again, looking at it from the point of view of a helix, what we're looking at as a photon, one is positive, one is negative, doesn't matter how you assign it, they have spin, so it's spinning this direction. And within that spin, it has momentum either going up or going down. This momentum can be changed, but momentum is conserved. So if you change this one, something else got changed. You cannot get rid of momentum. So we have a photon moving at the speed of light this direction, and they're also spinning in this direction. So if we're looking at it this way, it would have a vector velocity. I don't know how to describe it. So the photon's moving towards you. It has a vector velocity this way. And if you look at the vector, it would actually be moving faster than the speed of light. Now, when I say faster than the speed of light, do not get your panties in a wad. We are not talking faster than 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. It is actually smaller than what we estimate the speed of light to, what we round it off to. So in this helix, we're looking at two charge points going in a circle either this way or going in a circle this direction. The third way to do it, and this is a hard way to wrap your mind around, it's saying that each one of these charge points is the center point of a vortex, and the vortex is what's important, not the center of the charge point. So we have vortex waves, and what this helix equation pretty much states is that we're not made of particles, we're made of waves. If you go down to the ocean and look out at the waves, it would be to say that we're not made of the water and we're not made of the air. We're made of the energy that's being transferred between the water and the air. So you take a whole bunch of these waves, take two of these waves, put them together, you get photons. You take more photons together, and eventually two of them will merge and you'll get an electron or a proton. And from there, we're talking about vortex waves becoming first energy, then matter, molecules, and after molecules, all of a sudden we have building blocks to build everything else. Okay, on the search for gravity, the thought was that, or my original thought, which failed, is that if we have a spin and it's moving faster than light, then gravity might get to us faster than the photon itself. So with the equation that I finally decided on being the most likely, when I do a squared plus b squared equals c squared in a calculator, these numbers are the same, so virtually it is neglectable. Going back to the gravity, if a charge from a photon goes in a straight line and that charge was a graviton, how much faster would gravity waves get to an observer before the light waves arrived? My conclusion on this was they don't. If a photon goes in a straight line, what I'm saying is that if one of these vortex waves went in a straight line, my conclusion on that is a vortex by itself does not. They have to have two of them going together in opposite directions to lock in place in order to maintain that straight line. One of them is a magnetic wave, and it is affected by other magnetic waves, and it would move off in one direction or another, and it'd find some way to either go in circles or follow whatever magnetic lines are out in space, and it would just disappear somewhere. or turning at a 90-degree angle, then what happens is the amplitude is approximately half the wavelength, or even if we make it the same wavelength. When you look at the hydrogen atom and all its different possibilities for energy states, this system fails very, very quickly. Take that away and moving on. Okay, so I went out and I looked at every formula that I could find with amplitude in it. The one I came up with that solves the best equation and gives me a good, nice line is the one with amplitude of a guitar string. So we're taking the mass of a string, and that is the mass of the wavelength. If you take a wavelength of the string and the distance of that wavelength, the mass between point 1 and point 2 would be the mass of the string. Angular frequency, this is the angular frequency of a wave. See, the mass is not in m, and velocity is also not in c. So if we're looking at these numbers, if you were to put a constant number here, an unknown constant right here, we could change that to an m. This falls under a wild ass guess, also known as a WAG. So from here I need to explain the difference between WAGs, SWAGs, and theories. On a WAG, you're just taking something and going off with a wild ass guess and see where it goes. If you get 1 or 2 points on it, you might be able to call it a swag if you can add numbers to it and actually get good numbers out of it. Then we're bringing it up to a swag, which is a scientific wild ass guess. So on my other side, I used this here, energy in joules, equal mc squared is energy in joules. All these other factors here, there's a bunch of things in energy in joules. I went with E equals mc squared. Doing this down, I brought my U to a constant times mass. My angular frequency of a wave I brought down to regular frequency. It also may or may not have a constant in it, so I just put a constant there. And my velocity to speed of light may also have something hinky on it too. So there's no real telling which ones can give me something off. But if I put a constant here, then I have it directly proportional to something else. Who knows what that constant is? Okay, so bringing all my math down, I get an amplitude of constant times 8.16 times 10 to the minus 5 times amplitude. So I have 3 things to multiply. 2 of them are variables. This constant here, if you don't know what the constant is, it is a variable. So I got to find out what that constant is. The wavelength, it's one you can just put in whatever wavelength of light you're looking at, and would give you the amplitude per wavelength. If I allowed c to equal 1, I get this, 10 to the minus 5, and when I put it back into this, I get numbers that don't look good. So I threw it out, basically set it aside, might look at it again later if I can't find anything better. I do find something better, and I found it in a microwave oven. We have 2450 megahertz, and that is the distance between this positive and that negative charge. So how we're getting the positive negative is we have a hydrogen atom with all of its electrons towards the oxygen, and then over here, hydrogen atom, all electrons towards the oxygen. The center of the oxygen atom is positively charged, but there are so many electrons around it that the charges surrounding it make it into a negative charge. If you're outside that electron form, then what you're looking at is a negative charge on that. So we're having the center of that negative charge being the center of the oxygen atom, and the same here with the center of the positive charge being the center of a hydrogen atom. So we have 0.61 angstroms. Place that in here, and I can take this number multiplied by that number and I come up with this number right here. And how I came up with it is that you have to remember that positive, negative, the center of the charges, this would be the diameter of the photon. We are looking for the radius, and it is the radius that is the amplitude. So after doing this, I came up here, and this would be the diameter, take it in half, and I get radius. And since we only have 2 significant digits in the distance of the charges on the water molecules, we can only claim 2 significant digits here, which is 2.5 times 10 to the minus 10. Now, since I've gotten these things to look good here, I've gotten this to look good here, and using scientific method, everything works out, and I'm going to take it up from a wild-ass guess to a scientific wild-ass guess. Okay, going back to another WAG. If you look at an electron, we have, inside an electron, we have 3 charges. We have 2 negative charges and a positive charge. If you put this in a cylinder, as in how they rotate this direction, the rotation is the diameter. And if you switch it this direction, the diameter would get bigger, so that you can have larger wavelength or larger amplitude photons, diameter photons hitting this electron and still connecting with it. So you have a range of wavelengths. This is one of the problems with this 2.5 times 10 to the minus 10 theory, is that I don't know exactly how big my range is for this effect. The other aspect on the math is the length, and why the length doesn't matter towards your velocity is that the velocity of it is less than 1% of the speed of light. And at 1%, if you're using time dilation or length dilation according to Einstein's relativity rules, then the difference would be 0.99995 at 1%. We're not even close to 1% on that. So we're actually 0.12%, and that's quite a bit less than this. So Einstein's theory of relativity, we don't really have to worry about any special math. Going back to swag, we have a proton, which is positive, positive, and a negative in the middle. Velocity changes with this, we have no idea, or at least I don't. Electron, velocity changes. When we go back to each one of these, N1, N2, N3, each one of these states, we have a velocity change. Every time you go out to one, the velocity gets cut in half. So we do have velocity changes with that. And it also, the velocity of electron also changes with voltage. And that is a velocity change. It's not necessarily the acceleration. Okay, so my final conclusion is that a photon has an approximate amplitude of 2.5 times 10 to the minus 10th. It may not be a theory in physics, but it is my own personal theory, and that's because it just looks good. I'm not saying that it'll actually work or it'll actually pan out to be true. I'm just saying with what I have done, it looks good. If we look at the lowest frequency, which is 76 Hertz, which is used for submarines, this is where the theory breaks down. And I don't know which direction it would break down in. It uses an antenna length of 1,972 kilometers. It'd be, in miles, it'd be 1,223 miles. The amplitude of it is the wavelength times the constant, and I I get an amplitude of approximately 1/1000th, or approximately 1/1000th of a meter. Or if you were to double that to make a diameter, you're looking at about 2 millimeters between charge points. And 2 millimeters is bigger than an atom, so for both those charge points to be absorbed, this thing pretty much fails for gravity to be smaller than that, or gravity to have a bigger wavelength than that, smaller frequency and bigger wavelength. Power grid works at 50 to 60 hertz, and gravity waves would have to be less than the 50 hertz, making photon diameter gravity bigger than 2 millimeters, and therefore a two-point absorption where we have an electron coming in and both vortex fields, vortex waves are absorbed, and whatever absorbs these three waves could also, in theory, absorb the photon vortex waves also, and combine the two of them. Whatever forces them apart could also separate them. We know that BBO crystals can take two photons, put them together, and actually discharge a photon twice the size. They can also take a photon and split it in half. So we know there's a size difference in which an electron can absorb on a photon. So we don't know, let me rephrase this. I don't know that the two would be matching identical. It could be that only one of them is striking and being absorbed, and the other one is just moving into oblivion and following whatever course of action it takes. There's also a possibility, so we got three possibilities: one that both of them absorbed, one that says that only one of them is absorbed, which I have not gone over in this video, and one possibility that both possibilities are correct. So it could be just one, it could be just the other, or it could be the fact that either one or two charges could be absorbed. And gravity being less than 50 hertz suggests that one-point absorption is possible. So who knows what this theory will bring? Maybe someone will do some more math on it and find other aspects to it.